For most people, an unexpected illness can be written off as a one-time cold or slight infection, or in recent times, maybe a nasty case of COVID-19. How long would you have to be ill before you began to think you were being poisoned? For Michael Wallace and David Castor, they took too long to deduce what was happening to them, and in the end, they paid with their lives. In today's video, we'll be looking into the case of Stacey Castor, a woman who murdered two of her husbands and nearly sent her own daughter to the grave in order to save her skin. Stacey Daniels had an average childhood as the daughter of Jerry and Judy Daniels, born on July 24, 1967. She grew up showing above-average levels of intelligence and had even expressed an interest in joining law enforcement in some manner, which, to be fair, she would eventually involve herself in the law, although probably not in the way she intended. 17 years later, in 1985, she met a man named Michael Wallace while still in high school, and the two quickly became very close. By 1988, the two had gotten married and had their first child, an adorable daughter named Ashley, and just a few short years later, in 1991, they had a second daughter named Bree. Now, these high school sweethearts weren't as perfect as they appeared at face value. While both Michael and Stacey worked as a mechanic and an ambulance dispatcher respectively, the family didn't have much money, and the two were barely scraping by in providing for themselves and their children. Not only did they have money problems, but Michael had an issue with drugs and alcohol that weighed heavily on his and Stacey's marriage. When this paired with the fact that Stacey heavily suspected Michael was cheating on her with several other women, it became evident to everyone that their marriage was soon coming to a close. By the end of 1999, just over 10 years after the two had originally gotten married, Stacey was planning on getting divorce lawyers involved. However, with Christmas and New Year's rapidly closing, she decided to put her feelings aside for a few more months in order to give her children one more holiday season as a family. Around the same time, and seemingly unrelated to the decline in their marriage, Michael soon began to have a rapid decline in health. He was constantly coughing and swollen, with several family members later recalling that he seemed shaky and unsteady on his feet. The holidays came and went, and after seeing the poor state Michael was in, his extended family insisted he go see a doctor and finally got a solid diagnosis for the mysterious illness that had suddenly befallen him. Unfortunately, Michael would never get around to discovering what was wrong with him, as he would be found dead on the living room couch in the Wallace's home on January 11, 2000. Michael was only 38 years old at the time, which would make him quite young to have died of a heart attack. However, that was the first and most plausible conclusion that doctors jumped to. Michael's sister was suspicious of her brother's death and requested to have an autopsy done, but when doctors brought this up to Stacey, she refused, citing that she believed the doctor's theory and saw no reason to look into the death further. Not seeing anything suspicious with this, the doctors moved on and Michael was promptly buried, leaving behind a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old daughter, as well as a wife who had seemingly already moved on from her husband's sudden passing. Stacey collected $50,000 in life insurance from Michael's death and took her daughters to Disneyland before carrying on with life. In August of 2003, Stacey married another man by the name of David Castor, who owned his own HVAC company. The two of them bonded over the fact that they had each been married before and had each had children from those previous marriages. As with any relationship, their marriage wasn't perfect. Reportedly, Michael didn't get along super well with Stacey's two daughters. However, the family made do and things seemed to be going relatively well for the family. That was until 2 years later. In August of 2005, when Stacey and David were planning what to do for their 2-year anniversary, and David suggested that they take a 2-week vacation away from both of their kids in order to get some alone time. Stacey was adamantly against leaving her kids alone for 2 weeks, and somehow this devolved into a heated 7-hour argument that ended with David taking a bottle of whiskey and locking himself in the couple's bedroom. A few days later, after this argument, 911 received a phone call from Stacey regarding her husband's well-being. In the call, she stated that her husband didn't show up for work that day and that she hadn't seen or talked to him since 5 o'clock Sunday, and that she was afraid he might have done something dangerous to himself while locked in their bedroom. Officers arrived on the scene to help and forced their way through the locked bedroom door, where they were met with the sight of David Castor dead, lying naked and face down on the bed. The police quickly investigated the bedroom for any pieces of evidence that could explain David's death. In the room, they found the bottle of whiskey he had brought with him, a bottle of cranberry juice, a cup by the bedside table that was full of what appeared to be an almost fluorescent green liquid, and partially hidden under the bed was the damning evidence that pushed the police to investigate further, a bottle of antifreeze lying on its side on the floor with the cap off. It wasn't much longer until an officer also discovered a turkey baster in the trash can that smelled of both alcohol and antifreeze. Some officers jumped to the conclusion that David had chosen to take his own life by drinking antifreeze, and Stacey backed up this theory by saying that David was going through a lot of troubles in life, including the fact that his own father had recently passed. However, not only is that a super uncommon way for someone to kill themselves, but it's also an incredibly brutal and painful way to go. In fact, why would he choose to do that when there was a shotgun under the bed that would provide a much less painful and drawn-out method of ending his own life? When other interviewed family members and friends of David contradicted Stacey's story by saying it was very odd and out of character for David to have killed himself, the police dug a little bit deeper into this apparent grieving wife. When they found out that Stacey had another husband who died of an apparent heart attack, they decided not to rule David's death a suicide until after a thorough investigation. Soon after, the police began to send off their evidence for lab analysis and soon found that the glass of the mysterious green liquid, which was soon determined to be antifreeze, had Stacey's fingerprints on the bottom of the cup, as though she was holding the bottom of the cup and encouraging someone to drink from it. According to statements made to police by Stacey, she hadn't been in the bedroom for a few days, so how were her fingerprints on this glass of antifreeze? Testing from the turkey baster also revealed that it held a mixture of alcohol and antifreeze, as well as some of David's own DNA at the top of the baster, as though it had been in his mouth. However, his fingerprints could not be found anywhere else on the baster, making it unlikely that it had been used to poison himself, as Stacey was claiming he did. The police also soon discovered that David's recently written will left everything he owned, including his business, to Stacey and her daughters, weirdly excluding David's own flesh and blood son, with whom he had a healthy relationship. Putting together the pieces about what likely happened to David, investigators decided to turn back to the case of Michael Wallace and had his body exhumed with the intent of autopsying him. During the autopsy, they found small crystals in his body that was the result of his body absorbing antifreeze. With the evidence stacking up against her, the police decided they needed to re-interview Stacey. On the bedside table next to David's body was a glass of antifreeze, an empty glass, and an open bottle of cranberry juice. The detectives asked Stacey if she remembered which glass she poured the cranberry juice in, to which she honest to God replied, "Well, when I poured the cranberry juice." By this point, the police had basically caught her red-handed, but the case continued to deepen. Throughout this entire investigation, Ashley and Bree stood by their mother and insisted she was innocent, finding it hard to believe that the woman who had loved and raised them could be capable of such horrendous acts. So when Stacey called her oldest daughter Ashley and invited her over for drinks to take some of the stress off, Ashley thought nothing of it. Ashley showed up at the house and was given a drink from her mom that Stacey had separately mixed into a plastic cup. Ashley felt tired after having some drinks with her mom and decided to sleep it off before going back to college in the morning. The next day, her mom calls and asks to drink again, and once again gives Ashley a special mixed drink. The day after this, 911 received a frantic phone call from Stacey claiming that Ashley had taken a mix of pills and alcohol and needed medical attention. While this phone call was going on, Bree, Ashley's younger sister, discovered a suicide note where Ashley conveniently confessed to both the murder of her flesh and blood father as well as her stepfather, before saying she was very sorry and that she had to kill herself. Ashley was rushed to the hospital and received intensive care, and luckily she managed to pull through. Imagine her surprise when police questioned her about a suicide note that Ashley had no memory of ever typing and printing. Sensing that Stacey was up to more trickery, investigators found the laptop the note was typed up on and discovered that not only was the laptop Stacey's, but that the timestamp on the letter and rough draft of the letter were from times that Ashley was confirmed to be in class, making it impossible for her to have written them. With a mountain of evidence against her, Stacey was swiftly arrested for the murders of her husbands and the attempted murder and framing of Ashley. Stacey was inconsistent and hypocritical during her trial, and when questioned about why a then 12-year-old Ashley would have slowly and methodically poisoned her father with antifreeze, Stacey could only reply, "I don't know." Stacey was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 51 years in prison, which at her age was basically a life sentence. Stacey spouted her innocence until the very end, even up until her death on June 11, 2016, where she was found deceased in her cell of an apparent heart attack. With this, we've reached the end of Stacey's story. Let us know your own thoughts about the case down in the comment section below, and let us know about any other cases you'd like us to cover. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider liking the video, hitting the subscribe button, and ringing that bell in order to get notified when we post another video just like this, and we'll see you in the next one.